Just like last time, wrestling's got plenty of missed opportunities with all the decades. The thing with this video, some are so obvious as day while others are a bit different from what you usually hear, but the 10s is full of them. When Christian returned to WWE in 2009, there was a lot of hope for him to be a major star after rebuilding himself in TNA and proving he could do well as a main event talent. After a rumor about a potential Jeff Hardy feud got leaked, they changed plans and turned him into the face of ECW. This role worked well for him, but it wasn't close to what you envisioned Christian would do before his return to WWE. Nonetheless, he rolled on and was one of the best in-ring performers of 2009. When ECW officially ended, Christian moved to the Raw brand and immediately qualified for the Money in the Bank ladder match for WrestleMania 26. Looking at the lineup, Christian actually had an amazing chance of winning. He was the most qualified out of all the guys and the safest option. There was only two real candidates, Kofi Kingston and Christian. Drew McIntyre was the favorite, but he wasn't ready for it. You know who WWE chose? Jack Swagger. Yup, the man who became a generic world champion the moment the ref counted 3. Christian easily would have been a great briefcase holder just on the basis of how the SmackDown main event scene was at the time. It was Edge and Chris Jericho, two of his biggest tag team partners ever, feuding for the title. He could hop in there and immediately you could feel the history from these three, but Jack Swagger, the poor guy stood no chance. His character was gone, he had boring title feuds, and Big Show outshined him in a story that was designed to put him over. I think if Christian was involved in a title scene as a face, it could have finally led to that big Edge feud, which I'll always consider a missed opportunity seeing as the rated R superstar retired a year later. The WWE game that year literally had a story that was compelling involving Money in the Bank and Edge, and I didn't even think of it until now. Maybe subconsciously it was there, but there's a reason why SmackDown was dull at the time and Kane and Rey Mysterio had to fight for the title, because they relied on a Jack Swagger push. It was screwed the moment that title change happened and The Undertaker broke his nose. The summer of 2010 brought two huge storylines. The Nexus was one. The group casted terror on the Raw roster, but that's a story we heard one too many times. The simplest thing I'll say about that story is that Wade Barrett should have came out of it with at least one WWE championship to his name. But the story I wanted to talk about was one that Nexus indirectly created. The anonymous Raw GM. After the Nexus took out the previous GM Bret Hart, they followed it up with the chairman of the board, Mr. McMahon. With nobody running the place, an anonymous general manager was placed due to the danger and threat of the Nexus. This GM wrote emails and Michael Cole read them. We didn't know who this person was except some teases such as Stone Cold Steve Austin. But all that we knew was that he leaned towards being a heel. It was mostly fair for the most part. This was the problem. WWE started off this idea without knowing how to end it because it was a pretty big deal. Raw would start, Miz would talk nonsense, and you'd see and hear the notification before Michael Cole reads up something. At one point, Edge lost his mind and started a feud with the computer. Like if it was a slot machine, I'd understand, but this? Then again, he wasn't really treating him fairly, so there's that. Anyways, I don't like how this ended up being nothing. Of course, when it happened, the anticipation is gonna end, but I would have wished to see a story from it, especially if they kept it until the conspiracy story involving Triple H. Regardless though, the Hornswoggle reveal was horrendous and silly. Kevin Nash, Michael Cole, and John Laurinaitis would have been better, and you could give the story a conclusion. I thought Michael Cole was an annoying heel at the time, but most of that is because he's the main voice of Raw, but he really makes sense as the GM. It's the obvious choice, but a logical one. Post WrestleMania 27, WWE seemed to blow all the excitement away from the show of shows. It didn't really matter to look forward to the shows because we all knew The Rock and John Cena would face off next year, and that they would go 100% there. There wasn't many interesting stories after WrestleMania, but one mid-card story stood out easily: R-Truth's heel turn. He turned into a villain after losing his first world title shot to his friend John Morrison. Then all of a sudden this guy smoked a cigarette in the arena, and it was so strange because WWE didn't allow for wrestlers to say the word ass, and they were letting this guy smoke. R-Truth quickly lost his mind in his train of thought, becoming an unpredictable talent. R-Truth was so good during this time because he was committed and was picture perfect as a heel that had random intentions. You know, he could hug you one moment and then boot you the next. He did get a title shot, but I think they could have aimed higher with this character. Remember Money in the Bank that year? I think he should have been the rightful holder, all because of the looming threat he'd give the current champion. Truth's character was perfect for Money in the Bank. He could tease a cash in at any point, and because of how dangerous he was booked, there'd be that element of belief. I think it's unfortunate his character didn't go all the way to fulfill its full potential, because then him and Miz later on could look more threatening. Also, I find it insane that both Miz and Truth main evented Survivor Series against John Cena and The Rock. It was Rock's first match in 7 years, and of course, you're not gonna expect him to have ring rust for his big battle against John Cena, but it's still funny to think that Rock's first match in 7 years was against The Miz and R-Truth. And WWE punished both of them, The Miz and R-Truth, because the buy rate was underwhelming. Yeah, I'm gonna blame Miz and Truth for the buy rate when everyone knew who was winning. The summer of CM Punk fully established him as a permanent main eventer. He was finally at the top, and even if he lost a couple of big matches, as it relates to his placing on the card, it didn't matter because WWE didn't have anybody close to him on the roster. There was Randy Orton and John Cena, and that was it. But a part of the reason why Summer storyline fizzled out is in favor of another one, that being the conspiracy storyline involving Triple H, Kevin Nash, and John Laurinaitis. This storyline was far too big and overwhelming for them. It was so bad because similar to the anonymous GM, they didn't know the end point. It was rough because they had these huge stories with the wrestlers walking out on Triple H and a big conclusion to Hell in a Cell with Miz and R-Truth who were fired, trying to hijack the show. But to go back a bit, the story was about a mystery person pulling the strings and trying to make Triple H look bad. This involved his good friend Kevin Nash. It was a very messy story. Kevin Nash gets a message from Triple H's phone about taking out the winner of the SummerSlam main event, and it turns out he's the one that texted from Triple H's phone. I don't like this story because it feels like they want to take the heat off the big CM Punk story for the sake of it, because this whole storyline comes from the summer of Punk. If anything, Triple H should have been claiming he's cool, but end up turning heel later on to set up the game against the Second City Saint. That's what makes sense. I think if Triple H is inserted into the story, he has to be heel, because it serves no point for him to be CM Punk in a match that technically didn't matter. That's why this conspiracy thing is a missed chance. It should have led to a 2011 version of The Authority if it was going to happen. So initially, I thought about making 2012 about Cena's heel turn, but since I talked about it a lot, I tweaked this in favor of Cena's worst year. Now yeah, John Cena's heel turn's a missed opportunity. They could have done something different, we all know that. But what about John Cena's worst year? For Cena's worst year, I feel as if WWE didn't fully treat it as such. Technically, it's Cena's worst year, but they could have went all out with it and made Cena a broken man that needed to exercise his demons and regain the WWE Championship against The Rock. Because what we got wasn't exactly the worst year as the video package for his match makes it out to be, but it is still a bad year for him. But it didn't bring that kind of sympathy because in midst the year of 2012, it didn't feel like the worst year. He beat Brock Lesnar. That alone is a huge victory, and this was Brock right out of UFC and fresh and motivated, as opposed to Cena, who was depleted and depressed after his loss. So the missed chance here is the fact that his year wasn't worse. He should have been losing to mid-carders at some points, and I believe Cena should have been challenging for the Intercontinental Championship at one point and actually lose to the Big Show if they were going to do that to him, because if you guys remember, John Cena didn't lose to Big Show in that feud. We all knew that the moment the clock struck midnight and it was 2013, his luck would change, but I wish the journey was a little tougher because it could have been a great storyline that showed even the biggest and baddest of WWE could succumb to poor form. Regardless, 2012 was John Cena's worst year. He had no title, and he probably lost the most that year. Money in the Bank 2013, a pivotal point in the career of Cody Rhodes, a time that shaped up the rest of his career. The SmackDown Money in the Bank match was filled with many potentials, but the clear favorite seemed like Cody Rhodes. In some ways, he was the only choice, seeing as he had the best upside and already accomplished a lot up to that point. Surprisingly, Damien Sandow won the briefcase, and honestly, at the time, it wasn't a terrible choice. Many had love for Sandow and thought he was a great talker and had a distinctive character, but even at the time, he was not the best choice. Sandow's Money in the Bank run was spent being overlooked and overshadowed by Cody Rhodes himself, to the point where some believed Rhodes should just win the briefcase off him. The weirdest thing to come out of all of this is the fact that Cody Rhodes was a very compelling face. You never would have imagined it because he was generic last time around, and since then, he was nothing less than a hated villain. Money in the Bank should have been the chance for him. I think WWE needed to try different things out at the time. They did bring in Bryan into the main event scene, but it was followed by repeated John Cena and Randy Orton matches, Big Show in a pay-per-view main event, and we will never know what would have been of a Cody Rhodes main event push, but one thing for certain is that he would have been better than Sandow. I believe WWE had an idea of the title unification, which might have prevented it from going down anyway, but Damien Sandow's Money in the Bank run proved to be a symptom of a long-term problem for WWE. The fact they can't book briefcase holders well. You could already notice WWE being passive around this time, but this would go into another level as the years went by. There was one point after Daniel Bryan's main event push where WWE was insistent on doing things a certain way. Now, I'm not saying the crowd has great ideas every time, but when they're going insane for somebody who's done well for themselves and actually knows what they're doing, surely they'd give it a try. Dolph Ziggler's first push was entertaining and optimistic. He was WWE's workhorse from the end of 2012 towards the middle of 2013. While he got a world title reign out of it, he was told that this was as good as it was going to get, and to make matters worse, they put an injury-prone label on him, despite his injury being one that would happen to just about any person. Jack Swagger punted him like a football and he suffered a concussion. Ziggler had this mid-card feeling to him after 2013, but there was a glimmer of hope that maybe he would rise up above that. And here's the thing, Ziggler doesn't have a real weakness in his arsenal. If we're talking about him from 2014, if anything, we tend to underestimate his talent. When Roman Reigns came up with an injury, Ziggler took a spot at Survivor Series. This was one of the biggest matches of 2014. Team Cena versus Team Authority. It had high stakes and an incredible vibe. Ziggler made it to the very end and had one of his most iconic performances. This was a performance that got the crowd invested in him like never before, and they actually stuck the landing here, as with the help of Sting Dolph Ziggler managed to eradicate the Authority. There was a renewed excitement with Dolph Ziggler, as if his journey would get bigger and better. I'm not saying he was going to be the one to face Brock Lesnar on WrestleMania 31. When you drag out a story including the firing of Ziggler and his partners who won the match already, bring back the Authority and do nonsense 6-man tags while having said guy thrown out like trash in the Royal Rumble, of course fans aren't going to be invested in. This was a chance to reignite Ziggler and make him a serious challenger for the title, not somebody who we see as a Make-A-Wish challenger once a year. And their insistence on Roman Reigns leads me to 2015's big issue. When Roman Reigns burst onto the scene with the Shield in 2012, we all expected him to become a mega success. I remember the Shield initially was Dean as the talker and someone who I perceived as a leader, but as time went on, Rollins seemed like the brain, and right before the end, the Shield's strongest weapon was Roman Reigns. Any issue they had near the end, he was in the middle, and that tells us all we need to know. Now, Roman was pretty green without his Shield brothers by his side, but he was making improvements. I don't really touch any of this 2014 stuff, so when I watched this match he had with Randy Orton, I thought, damn, this guy didn't offer much in ring. His promos were so scripted and generic, and they had the element of what a cool guy would be to somebody in the 80s. And I'm talking about B-movie cool, not the Terminator or Rambo. 2015 as a whole is a time where Roman's push was mishandled severely, and in some ways, it felt like they were spiting the fans. Now personally, I didn't hate Roman Reigns, but I gravitated towards other talent, seeing as WWE in 2015 was an in-ring centric show. Roman was very enjoyable in 6-man tag team matches, but beyond that, there wasn't much that was going to get you glued to the screen. And I want to preface this by saying, Roman in early 2015 and late 2015 might as well be two different people, in ring at least. But in the beginning of the year, he was pushed too hard and thrown into the WrestleMania main event with no struggle or journey. It was presented generically, and the missed opportunity for me here is taking things slow with him. WrestleMania 31 should have been Roman versus Rusev. I still love the Brock match, it's one of my favorite WrestleMania matches, but if we're talking objectively, Reigns winning the United States Championship does a lot of good for him. I don't think WWE would like this though, because it would mean Daniel Bryan is most likely in the main event, but with this scenario, it allows Roman to build actual stories and have a journey to a title instead of a shortcut. I think he got better as time went on in ring, and of course there was other things preventing him from being at his best, but by the end of 2015, I personally bought into him as a main eventer, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of him. WWE's new year brought a lot of change and a feeling of uncertainty. The uncertainty was good because it was a new era and it was spearheaded by the likes of Seth Rollins and AJ Styles. For the women, this was a time that WWE constantly reminded you was a golden time for them. The women's division had a slow start, but it was much better than the last couple of years. I remember feeling very impressed by Sasha Banks and Becky Lynch's match in NXT at one point, and the reason why it was so impressive is because you never see this kind of action on the main roster. 2016 was the continuation of 2015, and with the brand split, WWE shifted its focus towards Charlotte and Sasha Banks for the Raw brand. And this is a story I have great issue with. Now on SmackDown, the women's division flowed and you got to see many different characters as actual threats to the title. On Raw, it was hot potato, and the worst part in all of this is how Sasha Banks won titles on Raw only to fail to defend that title. It gets worse because the first title defense was always a failed defense against Charlotte. This ruined the boss's momentum, and when you compare Sasha of 2016 to Sasha of 2018, you notice a huge difference because that crowd used to go insane for her, and it was all abandoned to give Charlotte some title reigns that no one remembers. This did a lot of damage to Sasha Banks and also established Charlotte as a stat pattern. For me personally, it's hard to get invested in her title reigns because they're not distinctive enough from each other. Off the top of my head, I can't name 5 of her title reigns, and the crazy part is she has 14. And this started with the hot potato. I never understood why Charlotte always won the title back when the lights were brightest, but I guess it's just WWE prioritized her over the others. So the missed chance here is establishing Sasha Banks as a much bigger star. It wasn't even going to hurt Charlotte because she's the main villain. She's always going to be around. I think it did a lot of damage, and there's a reason why they had to run towards Bayley and the other challengers over the next few years. 2017, a year of missed opportunities. It was also the time I started paying attention less to WWE. The product had some issues after WrestleMania 33 and I didn't bother with it. There was only a few things I actually remember watching, and unfortunately, one of them was LeVar Ball's segment. I say unfortunate because my memory should be of some match or segment. I think WWE messed up the dynamics of SmackDown badly, and it ruined the trajectory of the show for a year. One of the things I never understood was the Miz leaving SmackDown. I actually think he should have had Jinder's spot and won the title. So this leads me to 2017's missed opportunity. Now Miz isn't the same now as he was in 2017, but back then he was very established as a character on the show and somebody you bought as a champion. He'd find a way to steal a title. He did great work as Intercontinental Champion, and I thought he deserved to move up at the time. It made a lot of sense and makes way more sense than Jinder winning the title. Miz was already main eventing on Raw with the Intercontinental Championship. It was the prime of his career and probably the only time since 2011 that I think he deserved the title most. I thought it was a missed opportunity then and still do. I was gonna go all in on this year, but then I realized that's good for its own video. But to me, 2018 is the worst year in WWE history. It comes down to the fact that they were creatively bankrupt, and unlike 1995 and 2010, their roster was stacked like crazy. Dean Ambrose's heel turn, Sasha Banks and Bayley teasing a feud. You could talk about this year for a long time because it was amazingly bad. For this video though, we'll talk about one that's baffling. Braun Strowman's whole year. Braun Strowman was a man who WWE tried to make you see as a star, but at the same time made sure he wasn't anything more than he was. And because of that, it's hard to get invested in him beyond a match. His 2018 was horrible because it had the makings of an incredible one for him. He won the Raw Tag Team titles with the referee's son, which was random, the referee being John Cone, and the summer, despite this, looked optimistic for him. He won Money in the Bank, or as they called it, Monster in the Bank, and I don't even know what that means, but that's what they called it. And he proceeded to have the biggest waste of a briefcase run, turned heel during it while siding with Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre, loses his cash in a no contest Hell in a Cell match, then turns face again and chokes the title match he should have won. The whole year was a misfire for Braun Strowman, and in turn it turned him into a modern Big Show. WWE really tests you and then wonders, oh, he couldn't get over. It took Becky Lynch an accidental moment for them to think, maybe she should get pushed stronger. 2019, very similar to 2018, but a year I actually see more positively than 2018, although that's not saying much. The real issue with this year is misdirection. There was times you thought WWE was doing right only to mess up big time, and that was the story of the year. I assure you, by looking at each season of the year, you could find exactly what I'm talking about. One thing I despise is how Kofi Kingston lost the title and didn't acknowledge it much. Oh, New Day need help because of Big E's injury. That's fine and all, but it defies logic for Kofi Kingston to go on a 6-month title reign and not feel the shockwaves of a loss. That doesn't make sense at all. And also, him losing in 5 seconds served no purpose. He should have had a fighting chance. We all knew he was losing, but this is a part of a much bigger issue that WWE had around the end of 2019. The move to Fox was financially incredible for the company. It was also a chance to impress new viewers, seeing as Fox was a much bigger network than USA Network. And they messed up badly because one of their big feuds was Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin. Yeah, that sounds amazing. And the guy they were touting to lead SmackDown, he moved back to Raw within a month. The early days of Fox SmackDown were dire and one of the worst examples of WWE blowing an opportunity. Every week, the Dirty Dogs would take a beating, Lacey Evans would have a vignette for a run that would materialize into nothing, and the fans were about to start booing Roman again because his stories were horrible, and John Morrison made one of the dullest returns to WWE you'll ever see. It wasn't a good time. WWE wouldn't really understand the importance of Fox until Roman Reigns turned heel about a year later. So that does it. This is the list of wrestling's missed chances for the 10s. I just wanted to go for something different. Some of the obvious stuff is in here, but I enjoyed making some of the lesser known, or I'd say lesser thought storylines from the 10s. Alright, what'd you guys think of these missed chances? Please comment down below, and that's for this video. Make sure you hit the AA on the like button and perhaps the skull crushing finale on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.